Welcome back to the TacomaBeast channel, where, as you all know, it's all about the taco. Today we're in South Dakota at the C4 fabrication facility, and with me today is Caleb. He's the owner and founder of C4, and today he has an incredible product that I cannot wait to show you. What are you going to be installing on Project Great White?
Well, Mateo, we've been working on a new product for a while that solves a lot of problems for the Tacoma guys that are trying to put bigger tires on their trucks. So we call it our oversized tire fitment kit that allows you to cut the fenders and the flares and everything with a nice cutting template, so it's good every time, and body mount relocation, and then an actual fender liner that replaces and goes up higher and protects your air intake and your door jamb and all that stuff.
That's amazing, man. Us Tacoma owners, we've been wanting this for the longest time. I'm so happy you guys made it happen. So what up to what size tires are you going to be able to install with this kit?
35s is plenty of clearance for those. That was kind of the goal. I mean, that's kind of becoming pretty normal across the board for a lot of guys building trucks. 35s are pretty common, and you got to do a lot of hacking and cutting.
Oh, yeah.
And we've made a much cleaner way to do it. We have our oversized tire fitment kit for the 3rd gen Tacoma with us right here on the table. I'm just going to quickly show what the parts are real quick, and you guys can get a better understanding of what that kit consists of. So first of all, this is a full body mount relocation kit here. The body mounts on the stock Tacomas are really big on the frame, take up a lot of space, and that's what always has to get cut for the tire to fit. So we have a kit that offers just completely replacing that, cut off the OE1 and replace it with this kit here for much more clearance. The second item is the actual fender liner. These are like a high clearance aluminum liner that gets installed up high into the fender after the fender has been cut and trimmed to allow room to fit up to 35-inch tires. So a lot of guys know that once you trim your fender and make that clearance, you have to remove your plastic fender liner, and then everything's exposed in there. Your air intake, you'll get mud, rocks, water, everything in your air intake. You'll get mud and stuff all packed into the inside of your doors and the frame in there, and that damages the hinges, and it's just really hard on stuff. So these fender liners are made to go mount up high and seal off that area again, so you don't have to worry about any of those problems anymore. So these two items will be sold separately. We will be able to offer the body mount relocation by itself if that's all you need, or just the fender cutting templates and the fender liner kit if you already have a body mount relocation done. So we've got everything lined up ready to go here. Let's get started with our install. When you go to install this kit, you're going to need a pretty large variety of tools, but there's some main items, especially if you're doing the actual body mount relocation, that takes some pretty in-depth fabrication for at least welding skills for that kind of thing. So you're going to need grinder, cutoff wheels, grinding discs, that sort of thing, and plasma cutter actually helps big time if you have access to a plasma cutter for cutting the body mount off the frame. That makes the job much easier. However, it can be done with a regular grinder and cutoff wheels. It just takes a while. So grinder, plasma cutter, you're going to need a welder for welding on the new body mount. If you're not doing the body mount relocation and you're just installing our high clearance fender liner kit and doing the fender cut, you'll just need a grinder or some kind of air tool grinder to cut your fenders and your flares, and then install the fender kit. So it's just kind of basic tools other than those items needed. So first thing we're going to start with is we need to access the body mount bolts if you're doing the body mount relocation. So we got to pull up the floor mat, some of the carpet, a couple plastic panels, and we're going to get in there so we can remove that bolt. All right, so we got almost everything out of the way, moved our carpet back here, had to pull off that little styrofoam block that's under there. Now I'm just trying to get this plug out of here. This is where the body mount bolt is right underneath that spot. Once we pull that plastic plug out of the way, then your body mount bolt is right under here, and that's how you'll want to take the nut off from the bottom. This actually has like a locking mechanism built into it, so the bolt won't spin when you take the nut off from the bottom. So we just pulled our nut off the bottom of this body mount bolt. We're gonna go ahead and pull that bolt out of the top, and then we'll be ready to start cutting this body mount off the frame. So right now is a great time to take a look at all the problems that this kit is gonna help solve. So when you put 35-inch tires on, you're gonna be rubbing on your fender flares, on the fender, on the OE body mount, back here in this area too. You can see that someone's already performed a what they call a cab mount chop. So where they trimmed some of the original body mount, move it back and weld the plate on. Obviously it wasn't enough, it's still rubbing, and that can be a problem as well. So we're gonna completely remove this body mount and put our replacement one on there, which gives a lot more clearance. Also, These fenders weren't trimmed at all for 35, so when you steer the tire, especially with a a high offset wheel, it gets the tire right into the fender, and you can see where it's kind of eaten in and actually bent the fender right there. And it's also grabbed the fender flare, and it's breaking some of these clips around the side here, because when you get a 35-inch tire and you fully stuff your suspension up into the fender, it will break the flare free, and these plastic clips break, and then the flare actually will come off the fender. So we're going to take care of all of those issues with our complete OTF kit. So over here on this driver's side, we have this wiring harness that we need to get kind of loosened from the frame so we can get ready to cut, because we don't want to melt through those wires. So there's kind of a clip that goes into the frame right here, and I'm just kind of getting under there with a pry bar to try and pop that plastic housing loose. So it can be kind of tricky to get in there, but you can hear it pop there. So that pops loose, and then I'm going to pull this fender liner or mud splash guard here, and there's a bolt back here that holds this harness. I'm going to take that out, and then this will be a lot more free moving so we can keep it out of the way. So I've got a 12mm ratchet wrench here, and I'm just getting this bolt loosened up that holds the wiring harness back here. This bolt is unnecessarily long, so it takes a little while to get it out of there. Got the bolt all the way out, and now this plastic bracket is all loose here. So now we'll have room to be able to pull this back out of the way a little bit when we're cutting on the frame there. So I am ready to go ahead and start cutting here. I got my plasma cutter ready. I got a grinder with a cutoff wheel and some other tools I'm going to need to get this body mount taken off. So again, just want to be mindful of this electrical cord here. We don't want to melt through any of those wires, so keep that out of the way at all times, especially if you're using plasma cutter. Some pretty intense heat comes out of these and it can melt right through them. I'm getting ready to do that, and I kind of have to chop into it in sections, kind of open up the bottom so that we can reach into the top and get everything all removed. So one important thing you want to make sure you do before completely cutting this body mount off the frame is to support the body and hold it in place. Otherwise it will kind of settle, and when you weld on the new mount, it'll be too low. So we're taking advantage of the rock sliders here, and we're going to put a couple spacers in between. We're going to set those. These are pretty much the right height. We're just going to slide it right in between the pinch weld and the slider. So when this is cut off, the body will just sit on that and stay at the correct height. If you don't have sliders or something to rest it on, you'll want to set up a jack or something like that underneath the body to hold it in place. Just getting a few pieces cut off the bottom of the mount here. Always start on the bottom of the body mount and cut that open first. And then, because that helps protect your wiring so you're not shooting sparks onto it. If you start on the bottom, there's still a layer of steel in between there. Once that's opened up, then you can just kind of keep working your way around, cutting out little portions until this entire piece comes off the frame. So I got the main part of the body mount all removed from the frame. That whole piece is cut off of there now. Hooked on some bungee cords to pull these wires and get them really far out of the way. And I'm going to jump in there with my plasma cutter and cut off a few more pieces of what's left here. And then I'll start grinding and cleaning up the frame. So I just finished up cleaning all of the steel off the frame, all of the old OE body mount welds and everything, sanded out and everything super clean, so it's ready for our new body mount to get tack welded up in place. So we have our new bolt for the body mount that we're going to drop in the hole in the body here. We had our washer welded on. That's our little locking tabs that hold it from spinning when you're trying to tighten the bolt from the bottom. So this one is shorter than the original one, so we got to put this one in from the top, and then we can line up our new body mount from the bottom. So we just want to make sure that we rotate it until it locks into these little tabs inside the body here, and it's not sitting on top of those. Otherwise it'll crush them down in the wrong spot. So I'm going to go ahead and assemble the new body mount bushing into our new body mount. So we want to take, this is the bottom piece of the bushing, has this big, large diameter sleeve and then a smaller one on the inside. We're going to put that up from the bottom of the body mount. and make sure that this sleeve fits all the way through the steel. And then we'll take our top piece, put it on, and then we'll have a large washer on the top, another on the bottom, and then we're going to go ahead and line this up on the bolt we just dropped into the body so we can get this in place. So we're just going to slide that right onto that 1/2-inch bolt we put in earlier, and the kit normally comes with a lock nut, which is pretty hard to turn, so I just grabbed a regular 1/2-inch nut from our bolt collection here so I could spin this on real quick, and that's going to hold the body mount just kind of in place for now so that we can get our brace support plate slid up behind it and get everything tack welded in place. So I measured over 1.5 inches from the edge of this plastic, made a mark there. That's where we're going to line up the front of our brace plate. You can see we have an arrow laser etched into that plate. We're going to go ahead and slide it in behind our body mount, arrow to the front of the vehicle, lined up with our 1.5 inches. And then we want to set that plate so it's nice and parallel along the bottom of the frame, right on this radius portion here, so you can put a nice weld along all the way around that plate. So before we do any tack welding or anything on the truck, we're going to go ahead and disconnect the battery first so we don't run the risk of frying any of the electrical components or the ECU or anything from the engine. Okay, we got our plate all up in place here, and I got my welder hooked up, and I'm ready to just tack weld this brace plate in place. We do not want to weld this one yet. We're just going to tack this flat plate and then remove the body mount again. So once we have a tack on each corner holding that plate in place, I'm going to grab my wrench here and just loosen this nut, and we're going to go ahead and take the body mount back off of the truck because we need to get it out of the way so that we can weld all the way along the top of this plate. Then you can push your bolt back up in the hole to get it out of the way if you need to, and then you can go ahead and fully weld this plate all the way around. So I just finished welding our brace plate onto the frame, so we're going to go ahead and put our body mount back into position so that we can get that tack welded in next. So I tightened up this nut a little bit with a 3/4 wrench just to make sure that body mount is all tightened together. And you want to make sure that you kind of wiggle this steel portion around a little bit and push up on it. Sometimes it'll get jammed and get stuck at a weird angle and you'll have a big gap on the bottom here. So you want to make sure that it's fitting really nice against the plate all the way around. And once it looks good, we can go ahead and tack all 4 corners of that to hold it on. Now that that's in place, again, going to remove this bolt, take the bolt out the top, and then we're going to remove the rubber bushings from the mount so that we can fully weld it and the rubber bushings won't melt. I just finished welding our body mount on all the way around inside and out. It's fully welded. Now I'm going to throw this lower gusset plate in there. Before I throw that on, I just painted the back side of it and the inside of this opening because it's going to be really hard to get paint in there afterwards. So I'm just going to put this up in here. It goes flush against the round tube and recessed about 1/4 inch on each side here. Then it can be tack welded in place. Now I'm going to fully weld all the way around the bottom of that brace, and this is going to be all finished up and we'll be ready to paint it. So at this point we have everything fully welded. If you're not doing anything else, any of the fender cutting or anything like that at this time, you're going to want to go ahead and paint everything and let it dry so that it doesn't rust, and then you can reassemble your body bushings and tighten it down. So also don't forget, when you reassemble, make sure you get this wiring harness put behind the body mount here before you put the bolt in, of course. Get that put back in place, reinstall your little bolt here, and then you'll want to drop your body mount bolt in, reassemble your bushings, and go ahead and tighten that down. But right now we're going to move on to doing our fender trim and our fender flare cut, just so that we don't spray metal and plastic and stuff all over our fresh paint job. We're going to get this done first and then come back to painting our body mount. So we're getting ready to go ahead and cut and trim our fender flares and the actual fender behind the flare to give us clearance for the bigger tires. So first thing we need to do to prep for that, we're going to go ahead and clean off our fender flares real good. I just use some like glass cleaner, clean those off, and then we have some vinyl templates that we're going to stick to the flare. That's going to give us a guide for where we want to cut. So I've got our cutting template vinyl right here. So there's a bunch of pre-cut pieces in there that are going to get applied to the fender flare, 2 pieces on each side, and they are labeled D and P for driver and passenger. So I'm going to start with the driver's side here. Of course, that's what we're working on. So this one that's wider on the top and really narrow on the bottom, that's our driver's side. The first one that we want to put on, just want to go ahead and peel that off. And this small bottom end starts, we want to line that up all the way on the very bottom edge of the flare. So I'm going to line up this end of the vinyl piece with the very end of the flare and the outside edge here. There we go. Then we're going to follow that up along the back edge of the flare all the way up to the top here. Well, this vinyl doesn't have to be perfectly flat. If there's a couple ripples in it, it's really not a big deal because we're going to be kind of fine-tuning that edge later after we cut it and smoothing it out. So that's going to work just fine. We just want it applied along the edge of the flare here, and then we can line up our next piece on top of that one. I'm going to grab our other driver's side piece here, and the end with the letter on it is going to line up with the piece we just applied. So this one we want to start right up to the edge of that one. So I'll butt these two together here and then have an even edge right there. So this one's pretty tricky to get put in place. You'll probably have to reapply it a few times, but I kind of just let it lightly stick so that I can work on one little portion at a time. So we want this to line up, and then it'll essentially kind of follow the curve in the flare right here along the top. So we're just following that little angled edge along the flare all the way across the top. Stick that down, and again, like I said, if we have a couple ripples, really not a big deal. We just want to have this nice line to follow as we cut, and then we'll clean it up afterwards. So before we start cutting anything, we're going to take this original plastic fender liner out. So there's a bunch of screws along the inside. They use a 10mm socket to get those out. All the screws that hold the flare to that liner. So we want to pop all those out, and then there's these little plastic clips here that just push into the hole. There are some underneath the flare also, so you kind of have to pull the flare out of the way to get those, but I found that actually just drilling those out with a 3/8 drill bit, it drills out the plastic and then it just pops out really easy. Otherwise they're actually pretty hard to get out of there. And there's also this big chunk of styrofoam stuff back here. We're going to take that out. We'll no longer need that piece in there anymore. Once all that stuff's taken out, now we can get in here and cut along the edge of our template. I'm going to use a cutoff wheel and a grinder. There are a lot of people use Dremel tools, stuff like that, anything you can get in there and do a pretty nice cut along the edge of the flare and the fender. And when I cut, I'm going to go through the plastic and all the way through the fender behind it at the same time. So I've got my 4.5-inch angle grinder and a smaller cutoff wheel here. I'm going to start towards the bottom here and work my way up around the fender. You don't want to start all the way at the bottom because you'll end up cutting into the pinch weld and part of the body down here. Later on, we're going to just pop that bolt loose so we can pull the fender out and get some room to work back there. So I'll be cutting through the plastic and then kind of into the steel a little bit at the same time. And then once we get the plastic out of the way, we'll be able to see the steel fender better to get in there and fully cut through it. Okay, so we got it rough cut all the way through the sheet metal and the plastic. Now you can, if you didn't get all the way down to the edge of this plastic on the bottom of the flare here, you want to kind of pull that out a little bit so you can cut along up to the edge of your template there. And then in order to cut through the fender the same depth, you'll probably want to take this 10mm bolt out. Then you can pull the fender away from the body and get in there with the grinder a little easier. But as you can see, this is all obviously very rough, jagged cut right now. So the next thing I'm going to do is go in there and just sand all the edges of that and clean it up so it's a really nice smooth contour all the way around. Now this truck is getting one of our front bumpers installed too, so we're going to be cutting the bumper plastic all the way up to this line here. If you're not installing an aftermarket front bumper, then you can just kind of taper out the cut down here for whatever clearance you need at that time on the stock bumper. Okay, so I went through and cleaned up the fender and the flares really well. Got all my cuts nice and even and smooth. Got all the sharp edges off the back of the fender. So our fender and our flare is pretty much finished as far as any cutting or anything goes. Next thing I'm going to move on to is we need to hammer this portion back, kind of work the steel back to give more clearance in this area. So you can see someone else had already cut into this before. This pinch weld's been cut in a bunch of places. Normally we don't do that because we don't like to cut open the pinch weld. We would just hammer it over and fold the whole thing over to one side and then start working this material back to get that clearance that we need for the bigger tires. I'm going to go ahead and get started on moving that material back. So we got a bunch of this sheet metal all pushed back here. Just a lot of hammering in this general area here. Folded these pinch welds over that direction and flattened everything out. So now everything's pushed back where it's almost kind of flush with the cut of the fender there. And the reason we hammer everything and we don't cut into it is because this can cause a lot of water issues and rust getting in between the steel. And if you were to actually cut out all this steel and try to tub it and weld in a new sheet metal, that is a ton of work, and there's a lot of wiring. You got to remove all your carpet, a bunch of interior stuff, and it is a messy job to try and make that happen. So we get all our clearance just by hammering all of this sheet metal and pushing it back. So now that that's all finished for right now, I'm going to go ahead and prep our high clearance fender liner pieces so that we can test fit those and make sure that this is ready to go. So I'm just prepping our high clearance fender liner here. I attached our logo plate with the provided hardware. Now I'm just putting this rubber edge trim along the side here. This stuff is going to ride against the inside edge of the fender and make a nice tight seal along there so we don't have a bunch of mud and water and stuff getting up between the fender and the liner itself. So we have two brackets we're going to install back behind the fender liner here so that we can test fit our fender liner. Both of these have a D cut into them for driver's side. This is going to be our lower one, and I'm going to put that one on first. So we just have to loosen this upper bolt for the door hinge here. You don't have to take the bolt all the way out. We're just loosening it enough to slide this bracket in behind that washer. So we're just going to get that bracket right behind the washer like that. And this lower portion is kind of going to just sit on the bottom washer, just kind of rest up against it. And then we can tighten that top bolt again. We may need to make a couple adjustments to this after we test fit the liner portion, but this is going to get us started here. Then the next one is this upper one, the 10mm wrench to get that bolt out. So then we're going to loosely install this one, put our bolt through that bracket, thread it back in. So that hole is oversized, so there is some room for adjustment, but we're going to kind of put it about what feels like the middle of the hole, tighten that bolt, and then we'll be able to set our bottom portion of the fender liner in there and test fit it and see how it looks in there. So I'm going to go ahead and test fit our fender liner here just to see how it lines up with the material that we hammered back here and with our brackets that we have bolted in behind the fender there. So we can see once we push that in, this lower one is lined up pretty nicely right there with that nut insert on the bracket. And this top one, it looks like the bracket's off that way out to the outside too far. So we need to loosen the bolt, kind of push that bracket over. Maybe sometimes you can just bend them a little bit to align it, and that's all it takes. So I'm gonna pop this back out and make a couple adjustments. So I did a second test fit here after adjusting this upper bracket a little bit. It's lined up with the hole now. We'll be able to reach that one and get the screw in. Sometimes you kind of have to put, I like to use one of these like little Allen wrenches. Fits, if you can find the bracket back there, you can actually just put it inside the nutsert and pry the bracket over to align it, because those aluminum brackets will flex and bend a little bit in there, and that helps get it lined up so you're ready for hardware. I'm just going to make a couple adjustments with the hammer down here to flatten this over a little bit, and then I'm going to go ahead and seal this with urethane, or silicone I mean, and then paint all of this stuff so it's ready and we can let it dry, and then we can do the final install of the entire liner after that. We got everything painted, all of our paint's nice and dry and ready to go, so we're gonna do our final fit and install of our liner pieces here. So I'm gonna go ahead and get this one bolted in first. All right, so we pretty much just finished up our fender liner install. We had a couple 3/8 holes to drill up here for the remaining hardware in the front. And then I did some paint touch-ups on the black here, just to touch up any scratches from when we put it in, and it's all set up and ready to go.
So Caleb, this is a product that has been requested by customers for the last few years, and I'm so happy that you took on this challenge to make it happen. And not only did you take on the challenge, but you absolutely killed it.
Thank you.
Why is it that someone would want to rock this?
So there's a lot of really important things with this kit that it covers for the customer. So obviously we know a lot of guys are going to 35-inch tires. It's pretty common these days. What this addresses is it solves the issues of where to cut, how to do it nicely, because a lot of guys are cutting into their fenders, but it looks kind of rough when they're done because there's no guide or like really a good way to get it done. So we gets a good guide, so you have a nice cut every time. And then when you cut your fender, you have to pull the plastic liner out. There's nothing left in there. So it exposes your door area where the hinges are, all of that stuff. On the other side, it exposes your air intake system. So now you can get rocks and mud up and all that stuff. So now this puts the protection back in to seal that off, so you're not getting debris, water, mud, all that stuff up in those areas that you really don't want it to be. And then the other thing that comes with it, of course, we can get our optional body mount relocation. So there's a ton of extra clearance in this area. We cut back almost 3 inches off the fender right here. So that gives all the room you need for steering. And then we hammer this back, add the body mount relocation, and you have tons of clearance for 35s. One
thing that I realized is it's also sitting a bit higher, right, than the stock one, and that's definitely huge, because I've been in a situation where I bottomed out and that took the whole fender liner with it, you know?
Yep, so we cut about 1.5 inches off the flare in the fender here, and that's where your original plastic liner bolts into that.
Yeah.
And yeah, when you have 35s and you compress your suspension, it'll eat right into that. And then like you experienced, it'll break the flare, it'll rip the liner out.
It destroys it.
Leaves everything exposed. So this one sits up higher, a couple inches higher than what the original one does also.
Dude, and it looks so clean.
Yeah, it's a really nice finish for doing everything.
And then why was it that here we didn't, obviously we're going to be adding a front bumper, but what do you recommend with this part?
So this portion here, I mean, we kind of assume that pretty much everyone's going to have an aftermarket bumper if they have 35s and they're installing a kit like this. But for those who don't, you can just kind of taper this plastic cut down to whatever you want it to look like, kind of leave it up to the customer, like, hey, if I want to taper a little bit farther forward, they can do that. That's their choice. The flare will still stay clipped to the bumper if they have an OE bumper. But in your situation, of course, we're putting one of our bumpers on the front of your truck. So we'll be cutting this plastic off right in this area, and that bumper will come up to it nice and clean.
Sick. Awesome, man. Thank you so much for coming up with this kit. Guys, if you enjoyed this video, make sure to smash that like button. If you haven't already done so, make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel, and we will see you guys in the next video.